Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, from the preface, paragraphs 6 and 7. To lay down that the true shape of truth is scientific, or what is the same thing, to maintain that truth has only the notion as the element of its existence, seems, I know, to contradict a view which is in our time as prevalent as it is pretentious, and to go against what that view implies. Some explanation, therefore, seems called for, even though it must for the present be no more than a bare assertion, like the view that it contradicts. If, namely, the true exists only in what, or better, as what, is sometimes called intuition, sometimes immediate knowledge of the absolute, religion, or being, not at the center of divine love, but the being of the divine love itself, then what is required in the exposition of philosophy is, from this viewpoint, rather the opposite of the form of the notion. For the absolute is not supposed to be comprehended. It is to be felt and intuited. Not the notion of the absolute, but the feeling and intuition of it must govern what is said and must be expressed by it. If we apprehend a demand of this kind in its broader context, and view it as it appears at the stage which self-conscious spirit has presently reached, it is clear that spirit has now got beyond the substantial life it formerly led in the element of thought, that it is beyond the immediacy of faith, beyond the satisfaction and security of the certainty that consciousness then had of its reconciliation with the essential being, and of that being's universal presence both within and without. It has not only gone beyond all this into the other extreme of an insubstantial reflection of itself into itself, but beyond that too. Spirit has not only lost its essential life, it is also conscious of this loss and of the finitude that is its own content, turning away from the empty husks and confessing that it lies in wickedness. It reviles itself for so doing, and now demands from philosophy not so much knowledge of what it is as the recovery through its agency of that lost sense of solid and substantial being. Philosophy is to meet this need not by opening up the fast-locked nature of substance and raising this to self-consciousness, not by bringing consciousness out of its chaos back to an order based on thought, nor to the simplicity of the notion, but rather by running together what thought has put asunder, by suppressing the differentiations of the notion and restoring the feeling of essential being. In short, by providing edification rather than insight. The beautiful, the holy, the eternal, religion, and love are the bait required to arouse the desire to bite. Not the notion, but ecstasy. Not the cold march of necessity in the thing itself, but the ferment of enthusiasm. These are supposed to be what sustains and continually extends the wealth of substance. So Hegel is getting into here a theme that he treats of at greater length, actually, in the shorter logic, the encyclopedia logic, something that he there just refers to as intuitionism. And he treats it there as one of the major reactions to the Kantian philosophy. He first gives a pretty in-depth rendition of Kant's critical philosophy, and then he has this short little chapter on intuitionism. And he seems to associate that with some of the kind of anti-philosophical literary trends within German Romanticism, particularly the Jena circle the great poet, critic, scholars like the Schlegel brothers, Ludwig Tieck, Novalis, the theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher. Hegel had associations with, personal associations with many of these figures, though he was often critical of their ideas. In particular, Schlegel, his theme of romantic irony or philosophic irony. Hegel takes aim at that in his lectures on aesthetics. And that's kind of part of what he has in mind here, though his remarks, I think, extend quite a bit further. And you can even see a kind of preemptive criticism of certain modern philosophic schools. I think particularly pragmatism, where his claim that he's taking aim at the idea that edification rather than insight should be the aim of philosophy. That's something that I think modern neo-pragmatists like Richard Rorty would seem to endorse. And Hegel kind of disagrees with that. He thinks that insight is really quite necessary here. The nature of his criticism, though, there are several different ways that he attacks this intuitionist trend. In the first place, he seems to, I think part of what he has in mind here is something that Freud will deal with in the opening segments of Civilization and Its Discontents. He talks about a critical response to his early work, The Future of an Illusion, one of his weakest books, which is basically his kind of take on militant atheism, his argument against organized religion and the idea of a supreme being. And somebody had criticized Freud's book by saying that it basically ignores a very, very common sort of feeling, what Freud calls an oceanic feeling, or a sensation of eternity, a feeling that not everybody has, but that many people claim to have. Some of them even claim to have it almost constantly, a feeling that oneself is being kind of dissolved or diffused into a grander cosmic unity, a feeling that one is a part or a microcosm in the grander unity of being itself, or the universe. Freud claims that he's never experienced such a feeling. He feels that this is basically just a piece of literature, though he's very much interested in what it might signify. And Hegel here is characterizing, I think, a similar sort of feeling that has come to prevail or find expression in a great deal of contemporary literature. This idea that truth is not something that you encounter at the end of a reasoning process. Truth is something that you are always already encountering in every moment of conscious awareness. You know, truth is just the spontaneous encounter with whatever is not oneself. I'm experiencing truth even right now. It's something more experiential than rational. It's something that you intuit rather than explain or demonstrate or define or prove. And it would seem that it's the mark of that kind of intuitionist conception of truth. The highest instance of it would be something like a religious experience. And Hegel is very, very explicitly identifies this form of kind of anti-philosophic philosophizing with religious mysticism, some immediate knowledge of the absolute religion or being. So it's not hard to find schools of thought that we could apply that to. We could even think of it in terms of Heidegger's kind of anti-doctrinal conception of truth. Truth as unconcealment rather than truth as the correspondence of a proposition with its reality. That I think Hegel is very skeptical of, and the basic theme I think that we get here, something that's going to recur in almost every paragraph that Hegel wrote, is his opposition to any form of immediacy. He calls this at one point the immediacy of faith. The idea is that truth is something that you encounter, again, in an immediate fashion. Truth is what's happening to me even as I speak. It's not something that I have to reason my way toward. Mediation would be the mark of that reasoning process. There has to be explanations and definitions and conceptions that put me in touch with some kind of a truth, and I had to be able to sort my way through all of those things before truth makes itself available. That's more or less, I think, the position that Hegel is defending, and he's very skeptical, I think, of any notion of an immediate encounter with truth. It's not something spontaneous. It's something that we encounter through labor, and it takes time. It doesn't reveal itself to the first comer, and there is a kind of privilege to it. You know, it may be that we never encounter it at all, and only a certain kind of labor and a certain kind of laborer ever find themselves in any kind of a relationship to it. But the important thing I think to take here is that this will be his fundamental strategy. Whenever we encounter something that seems to be given, merely given, or spontaneous, or immediate, or directly intuited, Hegel is always going to want to demystify it by showing that, in fact, it requires a great deal of mediation. In the chapter on intuitionism in the Encyclopedia Logic, for instance, he highlights Descartes' most famous argument, the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And he ridicules the idea that this is even an argument at all. He says that, you know, the only way that you could really even mistake that for a syllogism is by supposing that the word therefore always occurs in a syllogism. But it's not. It's not really a syllogism. It's not really an argument. There's no middle term. There's no evidence or conclusion. It's really just a direct statement. And the truth of it really is to be found, again, in just a broad, spontaneous experience of what it tells you. I think, therefore I am. As soon as you understand what the sentence says, you already kind of have to agree with it. You can't not agree with it. It becomes, not to acknowledge its truth would simply be a kind of stubborn adherence to nonsense, right? If there is thinking, then there has to be a thinker, and that means that the thinker must exist. If there's thinking going on in me, then I must, as the thinker of those thoughts, be something real, something that exists. And Descartes will then sort of use this as the Archimedean point from which he attempts to construct his whole philosophic system. And Hegel, of course, notes there that as soon as Descartes did this, he transformed the whole philosophic scene. Everybody that read Descartes just kind of spontaneously agreed with him. And that became the new foundation for a trajectory of the history of thought. But then the question becomes, what happens to everything that happened before Descartes? How was it, if indeed this statement seemed so obvious and self-evident to everybody that read it in the year 1640, or whenever it was that Descartes published his Meditations, how is it that nobody ever thought of it before that? Why did it only happen with Descartes? And Hegel's answer is that it's not at all a spontaneous insight. It took centuries worth of thought for philosophy to reach the point at which Descartes could finally formulate it and have it make sense. And in fact, if we look a little closer at the history of philosophy, we can find instances of philosophers formulating sentences that sound almost exactly the same. There's a passage in St. Augustine that says pretty much the same thing as cogito ergo sum. And yet, when people read it in St. Augustine, you know, in the 5th century and thereafter, they didn't hear what they heard when Descartes announced it. Again, the argument didn't really become a theme for thought until the 17th century. And it required enormous works of philosophical mediation to get us to the point where the phrase cogito ergo sum could mean anything to us at all. So this is his basic critique of intuitionism gives us, I think, the kind of form in which we're going to find Hegel criticizing almost everything. It's going to be sort of taking claims of self-evidence or immediate, inarguable, spontaneous intuitions of truth, and showing that in fact they are deeply, complexly, historically constructed, and therefore susceptible to, for lack of a better term, deconstruction.